In this video, we'll be talking about variables in the Java programming language, and we'll be specifically looking at how do we do what's called declare variables, how do we initialize variables, and then how do we print with variables in print statements. So there are a variety of different variable types in Java. We're going to focus on these four to start. Now there are more variable types that we will focus on, but these are the ones that are kind of the most important for us. So the first one we're going to look at is an int type, which is an integer, which means it's a number that does not have a decimal part. So if we create a variable of this type, it can only contain things like 5, -3, 2, -4, things that are numbers that do not have a decimal part. Now, the second type of variable we're going to focus on is the decimal numbers, which are of type double. So if we create a variable of this type, the double type, you can have something like, 5.25, or you could have -3.6782, and it goes on forever, something like that. So we have two different numerical variable types, the ints, which contain just the integers, and the doubles, which can have decimal parts on them. Now we have both parts simply because for memory space reasons, ints take up a lot less space than doubles because they don't have the variables on them. So if you know something is only going to be an int, you know that you don't need the decimal part, it's better and safer to use that int variable. The next one we're going to look at is a string, which are essentially a list of characters together. So this is something like if I were to type Sarah in, or Baldwin, or something longer that I might print to the screen with a message, something like that. So strings are lists of characters. This is essentially your text. It's how you house text in Java. And then finally, we have Booleans, which are our true or false values. And those are basically used for like an on and off switch of some sort. So we have those four main variable types that we are going to be focusing on. Now, in the Java programming language, we have to declare and initialize all variables before using them, which is different than other programming languages. So for example, the Python programming language doesn't require you to declare a variable, you just have to initialize it. And when you initialize it, it kind of declares it for you. Java is not that way. So in order to create a variable at first, you need to declare it. So declaring a variable means that you declare the type of value a variable will hold before it is used. This must be done to start. So here you have your generic syntax. You're going to have the type followed by its name, and then if you're just going to declare in that statement, you're just going to end with a semicolon. So here we can see we're creating a double variable and we're calling it cost. We're creating an integer variable and we're calling it phone number. A Boolean, calling it light switch, and a string and calling it first name. So here we have four different variable declarations. Note that the type comes first, followed by the variable name second. Now, after a variable has been declared, the next thing that we need to do with a variable is we need to initialize it. And it means we're going to give the variable an initial starting value. So sometimes you might just start these off as equal to 0, or maybe a blank set of quotes or something like that. But you need to start it off with some sort of initial value. So you can initialize a variable by putting a variable name equal to whatever its initial value is. So this statement can only occur after a variable has been declared. So we know that in the previous slide, we declared, the cost variable to be a double, which is why we can enter in a decimal value here. We know that phone number was declared to be an int, which is why we have a non-decimal number here. Light switch was a Boolean, so Booleans are either going to be equal to true or false. Notice it is all lowercase and it contains no quotes. So notice that's unique to Booleans. They can only be equal to one of those two answers, and they're lowercase with no quotes. And then here we have a string, which is going to be set equal to text in quotes. Now, you could be setting these equal to another variable value if you wanted to, but they just need to have some initial value in some way, shape, or form. Now, if you're looking at the past two slides going, wow, that is a monotonous process having to declare and then initialize, why can't we do them both in the same sentence? We can. So here you'll notice that we can declare and initialize variable in one statement if we want. We can put the type, we can put the name, and we can put equals and initial value. So here you can see I basically combined the statements from the previous 2 pages, and I put a declaration with an initialization all in the same statement. We're creating a double variable called cost, and there's its initial value. An integer variable called phone number, and there's its initial value. So on and so forth. So we can do them all in one line if we do in fact know what they're going to equal right off the bat at the very beginning when those variables are created. Now, the last thing that's kind of cool about declaring and initializing variables is you can actually declare and initialize variables of the same type in the same line. Now, for some students, they find this way too confusing, and for other students, they really like it. So I wrote down a couple of different ways we can do this. The main idea here is that you're going to start with the type that you have. So you can see here that the first word in each of these lines is double. Now, what we can do is we can just declare the variables, we can declare and initialize all of them, or we can declare some and initialize others too as well. So I kind of did all 3 in the statements below. So what you'll notice is we have the variable type. This comes first. After this, you'll see we have combinations of variable name and initial value. Then we put a comma. Variable name and initial value. Then we put a comma. And what this does is all of these are going to have the same type. But it allows me to declare and initialize them, if I would like, all in the same line. So here you'll see that I have declared, just in this line, I declared that length, width, and height are of the double type. So these are just declarations. There's no initialization here. Then in this next line, you can see I have length equals 20, width equals 30, and height equals 20. So what this line of code is doing is it's creating 3 double variables by declaring and initializing them to have values, which is an option as well. And notice that they're all separated by commas. Every time I have a new one, I can separate it by a comma. Then this last statement here, which is kind of the cool one, is we can have a combination of declarations and declarations with initializations if we want. So here, length equals 20. This one is being declared as a double and initialized. This one right here, width, I didn't put an equals. So this one is just being declared. And then this one here is being declared and initialized as well. So we have a couple of different options. I'm okay with whatever you're most comfortable with when it comes to these declarations and initializations. You will just need them in some way, shape, or form as you create different variables for your programs. So housekeeping rules we just need to take care of and make sure we understand about variable names in Java. We need to follow these particular rules. So the first rule here that you see is that names must begin with a letter or an underscore. So no letters, no other symbols. It can only begin with a letter or an underscore. Then the variable may only use a combination of numbers, letters, and underscores. So there's no other punctuation allowed. No exclamation points, no question marks, no dots, no number signs, no nothing. The variable can only contain numbers, letters, and underscores, and it can only begin with a letter or an underscore. Then the next thing is that variables cannot be one of the reserved keywords. Now there's a long list of these that you can look up if you would like. Typically, these reserved words are words in Java that already have a meaning. So something like while, which you'd use for, a while loop, or something like if, which you'd use for an if conditional. Even the word class. Class is tricky because you create classes all the time. Public class, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to use those key reserved words that are used commonly in Java. Instead, you want to think of something else. Then the next one is not a requirement, but it's something that's traditionally done, is that if you start these with a letter, they traditionally start with lowercase letters. And then the reason that is done is because objects and classes typically start with uppercase. So that's kind of how they differentiate in Java between variables and objects and classes. However, you could capitalize a variable name and Java will still be able to run it. It won't not run it. It's just traditionally not the practice that is used. Now, the other thing is you've probably noticed that you can't use any other punctuation, which means that there are no spaces allowed in those names as well. Because there are no spaces allowed in those names, there are two ways that programmers typically name these variables if they have multiple words in them. The first is to use what's called camel casing, which means the first letter is lowercase, and then you capitalize the first letter of each word after. So here you see first name, but the N here is capitalized to signify the beginning of another word. The other way that programmers typically do this is by using an underscore instead. Either way works. I tend to lean more towards the camel casing, but whatever you're the most used to and would like to use is perfectly fine with me. Just make sure that you do not include spaces in there or Java is going to get mad at you. So the other big thing we have to touch base on when dealing with variables is reassigning a variable value. Now, we know that we can declare and initialize values, but the purpose of a variable is that it's a value saved that can then be manipulated and worked with later on. So we need to be able to reassign it as needed. So here you can see a couple of different ways that a variable value is reassigned. So we're always going to have the name on the left. The variable name always needs to be alone on the left-hand side by itself, nothing else with it. Then you're going to set it equal to whatever you want it to be equal to, which could be a wide slew of things. So you could have it equal to a number, or you could have it equal to text if you want, if it's a string variable. You can have it equal to an equation. So that means like right here where we have width minus 50. You can even have the variable name in the statement to be something like length equals length plus 20. What this is going to do is going to take the current value of length, add 20 to it, and reassign it into length and kind of delete the original value. So you have a lot of different options here. You can reassign them in a variety of ways, but the big thing is that the variable name is on the left, and what you want it set equal to is something of like a number, a piece of text, an equation, or something on the right-hand side. And then all of those lines of code should end with a semicolon. So last thing we're going to talk about here are print statements with variable names and how these would behave if we were to put these into Java. So here we can see we have system.out.print and we have variables 1 and 2 being added together. Because there's no additional quotations or anything in there, these are going to print exactly as is, smushed together. So the first one is going to be hello. And then variable 2 is by, so I'm going to put by right next to it. Notice there is no space added because there's no spaces around these two words. Now, the second statement down here has an additional plus sign with a set of quotes and a space on the inside. So what this is going to do is going to take the first variable, which is hello. It's then going to add in a space there, so you have to leave room for a space that was added in there. And then we're going to have the word by. So notice that there is a space between them because of the addition of that space between the quotes. So that's kind of how you can sneakily add a space in, is to do plus with double quotes and a space in between. All right. The next one here has variable 1 plus variable 4 plus variable 5. So variable 1 is a string, and we go in order from left to right unless there's parentheses there. So we're going to do variable 1 plus variable 4. Well, since it's a string plus a number, we're going to just smush them right together. 8's going to get turned into a string, and this is going to print hello 8. And then from there, we're going to add variable 5 on. Well, that's 6. Well, since this is already a string, it's just going to add on the 6 at the end like a string, and it's going to be 6. Now, the next line of code, the big difference that it has is it has this set of parentheses. So what's going to happen is the set of parentheses is going to come first. And because the 8 plus 6, neither of those contain quotations, this is a math problem, and this becomes 14. So this one actually prints out to be hello 14 because of the use of parentheses there. Now, very end, here we can see we have hello variable 4 plus variable 5. This is just going to be 8 plus 6. There's no quotations, so that's going to print out the math problem there since there's no quotes, and it's going to print out 14. And then, finally, what's kind of cool here is, I know there's no parentheses here, but this is going to work in order from left to right. So variable 4 plus variable 5, that's going to come first. There's no quotes there, so that becomes 14. And then 14 gets combined with variable 1, which is a string. So this becomes 14 hello. So notice how these two statements right here are very similar. The variable 1 was just moved to the end, and that difference in location actually makes it different in the print statement. It's going to do the math first and then tack it on to the actual word hello.